Now, we're getting into our evolution here. The original propellered vessels were designed largely to take people across the lake. Cargo was secondary. The side hatches you saw in the Michigan were just for packaged goods, but what happened is we had a lot of bulk commodities that needed to be shipped from one place to another. Grain, salt, sand, stone is considered a bulk commodity. And so the designers of these vessels got rid of the passenger cabins. They created boats that had a series of upper hatches. The crew were housed in just small cabins on the deck, and inside the vessel is all empty for bulk cargo. And one such bulk cargo freighter we discovered, again, surprisingly, looking for the Chicora, finding not the Chicora, finding a vessel that looked pretty broken up. Now, we had in mind a couple of vessels that this might be, and so we took our list in our minds as we went down and dove on this. And remember, you're seeing actually the first dive. This is me going down. This is off South Haven in about 160 feet of water. And like that schooner, the William Tell, that burned, when we got down there and saw the little that remained, we knew that this vessel burned. We're seeing essentially the ship's structure here, the frames, kind of like the 2x4s of a house. These are the frames of a vessel, and not much left here. And so even when I was down on the bottom, I said to myself, well, we must have found the Joseph P. Farnan, a bulk freighter that sailed through the late 1800s, and we knew that it caught fire about 18 miles off South Haven in 1889. It was running empty up to Michigan's Upper Peninsula to pick up a cargo of lumber, and it had a boiler, a wood-fired boiler, and there was problems in the engine room, and the wooden vessel caught fire, and it was an inferno, we understand from the newspaper accounts. Now, interestingly, everybody again lived. You tend to think about shipwrecks as being death, but in most of the ones that I've talked about, the crew has lived. And again, this happened 18 miles offshore. I want you to notice before the video ends, again, the visibility down there. We're at 150 feet. We're not filming with lights, and we can see about 150 feet, the length of the vessel. The Joseph Farnan was 150 feet long. Here is the boiler where the trouble began. This is what started the fire, but that was a steel boiler, so it still remains. It burned everything around it. And again, you see the zebra mussel cover. So this is not the Joseph Farnan. We have not found a historic picture. That stymies us. In a lot of cases, these are just ordinary vessels. They're like the trucks of today, so there weren't pictures. But this vessel, we discovered the Olwell is very, very close to the Farnan. It would have had the open deck here. They would have loaded lumber right on the deck, and they would have fed it into holes in the sides and in the deck. So this is what these vessels look like. Now, what do we have here? Oh, the path of the Farnan. It was going from St. Joseph. It was going to come in here up to the Upper Peninsula. It only made it this far when the fire started. But I want to tell you how everybody was saved. People on shore saw through spyglasses, they saw smoke on the horizon 18 miles offshore. And the life-saving station at South Haven got to the rescue here. And they loaded their surf boat, but they realized that that was too far. The flames were going, they were too high at that distance even, they could see it. So what they did is they commandeered a bigger vessel. The head of the life-saving station here commandeered another vessel, another company's vessel, the Glen. It was a steamer, and they had to actually get the captain to power it up. You can't just turn the key and get these started. It took about a half hour to get the steam up in the boiler. They headed out, and when they got close to the Farnan, it was already an inferno, but they discovered that there was a life raft. 21 people were on board. Half of them made it onto one life raft, and the other half, including the captain, made it onto another raft. And so the Glen, it took about an hour and a half to get out there, but they were able to pick up all 21 people from on board those life rafts, and they watched as the vessel burned to the waterline. Nobody had seen it. until we got down there, and indeed it was burned down to the waterline. So it's an amazing touch of history when we saw that. Another bingo, another surprising bingo while looking for the Chicora was this very strange looking target. Right off South Haven, kind of off the nuclear power plant, just south of South Haven, about 160 feet of water. Listen.
We had several of them on this first dive. Looked into just about every nook and cranny that we could find, trying to discover the identity of this mystery wreck. The clarity of the water was outstanding that day, especially during that first dive. We could probably see 75 to 100 feet on either side of the wreck, which gave us a pretty nice perspective.
It's about 150 feet long and 50 feet wide. Two big propellers, all steel. Did you see those lines on the deck? That was a car ferry. It used to haul trains. But the trouble is, here it is in 160 feet of water off South Haven. There were no car ferries that ever operated off South Haven. The closest to South Haven was Muskegon. But we were able to identify this as a section of the Ann Arbor No. 5. Which allowed us to explore this whole fascinating car ferry industry, which really got its start around the turn of the century when people that were shipping bulk commodities got tired of taking a train load, let's say it's grain or stone or sand, and they have to offload it onto a boat, and then they have to drive the boat across the lake and offload it back onto another railroad car. So somebody had actually started in Scotland. Somebody had the idea, well, let's just drive the train right on the vessel. And indeed, that is what the engineers were able to figure out. Started in Scotland, in the Great Lakes. One of the first crossings was where the Mackinac Bridge is now. These car ferries crossed there, and then they operated out of Frankfurt and out of Muskegon. And so it was really a very economical solution to build these new vessels. But again, what problem is they didn't operate off South Haven. So what's a vessel doing sunk off South Haven? And in fact, it was only half of a vessel. Well, we did our research, and we found out that a marine contractor out of Muskegon, Baltimore Dock and Dredge, had actually bought the old Ann Arbor No. 5. They converted it to a work platform. They took off the upper works. They had the deck. Here's the railroad track still on the deck. And they used it for a very ingenious project. Mr. Baltimore, who's in his 80s now, his late 80s, designed a kind of a cofferdam system when they were building the nuclear power plant. I think is that Palisades? Palisades plant. They, divers had to lay water intake pipe, and this was going to protect the workers during heavy waves. So they took the Ann Arbor 5, cut down to a barge. They took a couple of other barges. They created this cofferdam. It was in place for a year and a half. But you can see the Ann Arbor took the brunt of the weather. And so after the project was done, after the plant was built, the Ann Arbor had cracked in half. So what they did is they scrapped the bow half in place. They hauled pieces, torched pieces, put it on a barge, took it to a scrapyard, and they thought, you know, we can probably save ourselves a lot of work if we just plug up the holes in the stern and take it to the scrapyard, towing it behind another vessel. Well, they did that, but they had a little oops on the way to the scrapyard. And we're not sure if it was an on-purpose oops or an accidental oops, but we interviewed a man who was actually on the stern telling us that they were trying to keep the pumps going, and when the boat became taking on a lot more water, he transferred onto the tow vessel, and down it went, and he said he even heard the concussion when it hit the bottom. And is this the craziest shipwreck you've ever seen? It plunged into the bottom. This is 120 feet of water, this is 160, and I've dived under here, and I hope I'm not under there when the thing decides to fall over. It's just amazing. It's been down there over 30 years in that position. So crazy discovery, but really allowed us to explore some of our maritime roots here in Michigan. Iron. We knew that the SS Michigan was built with an ironclad hull, but in the late 1800s, an ingenious man, Alexander McDougall, decided he was going to make a completely iron ship, and he was going to design it so that it could plow through the waves rather than crash over the waves. He thought it would be a more successful vessel that way. And so the Henry Court is one of 43 vessels that he designed. They were a rounded hull. You can see they're very low to the water. They had some upper cabins for the crew's quarters, but very low riding vessels. Well, here's the Henry Court in dry dock getting some repairs. It was built in the early 1900s and it sailed, but it had an enormously unsuccessful career. It sank a couple of other vessels, and it itself sank about 3 times before 1934, when it was trying to get into the channel in Muskegon, and they had an oops too. Didn't quite make it into the channel during the high seas, grounded right along the north breakwall. If anybody's been down to Muskegon, walked the channel, can you imagine this in 1934? 25 men were on board. Everybody was saved. It was very stormy, but the next day when it calmed down, they were able to get people across on a lifeline. But interestingly, one of the life-saving men perished in this accident trying to go out. So if we think of the Coast Guard motto, we have to go out, we don't have to come back, that's exactly what happened for a 21-year-old Coast Guard officer, Jack Dippert, lost his life saving others. This was an incredible piece of footage that we found in an archive. Actually, Grand Valley State University Archives called us when they found this. It's the day after. You can see the storm is still strong, and you can see the Henry Court broke its back right there. But a neat couple of seconds of footage to really put us in touch with this. And today, believe it or not, even though a lot of this vessel was scrapped, there was so much there that would have been a blockade for other vessels. But last summer, we made a dive, 20 feet of water, and here's one of the 2 boilers still there. So it's an amazing, again, a touch with history. You hear about it and then you go underwater and you say, there it is. So it's quite amazing. Now, a vessel that captured our interest is the Hennepin. I only have 2 more ships to talk about, but the Hennepin, we're moving up in our evolution. It's a vessel that we knew had an early unloading system. You remember I talked about those bulk freighters that had stone or salt or sand in them. Imagine trying to unload those. Well, somebody in the early 1900s, an engineer from Chicago, designed a rig that could self-unload. And we knew that the Hennepin was one of those ships, maybe even a very early one of those ships. And we knew that it was traveling from let's see, Grand Haven, here's Grand Haven to Chicago, delivered some stone. A lot of our stone from West Michigan went to Chicago to help build the bed that now holds the Lakeshore Drive and the Field Museum and the Science and Industry. That's all landfill, and it was a lot of our stone from Michigan that went to fill the land. Well, the Hennepin was on its way back empty, and it went down off South Haven. And we knew this, and the captain, everybody lived, another everybody lived story, 24 men on board. They all made it back. They were being towed. The vessel was so old at the time it was being towed. Everybody got onto the tow vessel. They watched their ship slowly sink, and they told the newspapers, which is as good as telling us because we look at the microfilm, and we know that it went down in about 230 feet of water off South Haven. So this was actually one of our easier discoveries. It only took us 3 days. It was right where the captain said it was. And we got down there, and immediately we knew that we had found the right vessel. Here's the conveyor belt. We knew that as a self-unloader, it had a conveyor belt. It had an A-frame. This looked just like the historic photo of the Hennepin. Believe it or not, this vessel sits in 230 feet of water, and that wooden structure, after 80-some years underwater, is still standing. So an amazing discovery. But it got even more amazing after we dove on it, after we saw how very intact it was, and it piqued our curiosity to learn about the roots of these self-unloaders. Here's the boiler towards the stern, the smokestacks, the ventilators are still standing. It was a steel boiler house. Really a very incredibly intact ship. You'll see a drawing. I have an artist who renders these because even with good video footage, we never can really see the whole expanse of a ship.